Good evening and welcome. I'm Hailey Coxon and I am the host of the Spirit of Motorsport TV. Thank you so much for joining us at our first episode for the Great Mountain Memories series. Now we have the wonderful Roy Moore and Barry Wood join us in the studio this evening. Now Roy and Barry joined us last year for a few episodes to give a hint of some of their amazing knowledge of the Isle of Man TT and Manx Grand Prix over the decades. They've joined us once again in 2021 to launch their new series and for episode 1 this evening for Mountain Memories. So remember, with these live shows, it is a live interactive show, so you can join us for the chat. Please do comment, tell us where you're from, where you're joining us from. If you have any questions, please send them our way. We want to hear from you. This is all, it's a TSOM family, right? So whatever contribution you want to make, we're always grateful for it. So please share with your friends, tag them in. If you know someone that's going to enjoy the show this evening, we're here for maybe the next hour, sharing some great content, some pictures, and obviously some memories from Roy Moore and Barry Wood over there in the Isle of Man. So good evening to John Kosierski. Howdy from America. Hello, hello, hello. Gail Core, looking forward to this, lads. Hope you have your laptop sorted, Barry. You just about has, Gail. Pete Forsyth, good evening. Please keep tagging your friends, guys. Invite them into the chat, onto the show. And remember, this is all about not just the mountain memories, but it's very much about you and getting involved in the show. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Mr. Roy Moore and Barry Wood. Roy Moore, legendary TT commentator, and Barry Wood, legendary road racer. Hello, boys from the Isle of Man.
Yes, Fast am I think is good evening, is it, in the Isle of Man? So for 2021, we're starting off on our kind of reminisce. Just like to kind of go back a couple of weeks and just mention a little, something that's happened, and it's kind of unfortunate that the COVID has put a paid to it. Really, it was we lost Alan Holmes, Manx lad, 1957. He was the first double Manx Grand Prix winner. And we were involved in his funeral. There's the hound dogs barking in the background, so we're away. And it's in relation with two things, really, because we've just mentioned something else as well. So Alan Holmes, we were up and away, and everything was done. And a beautiful thing that somebody had brought a Manx Norton along to the entrance to the crematorium. And when they were coming round, they fired it up, and that was what greeted Alan as he came up the driveway. So, yeah, so just remembering Alan, but it was in an era which is very familiar to me, and I think tonight we're going to cover that, Barry, are we? I'll do the earlier ones.
Give it a go, aye.
Yeah, I know all the women are getting all excited seeing your bedroom in the background. It's been their lifetime ambition to get themselves in there. Now they can actually see it.
He's teasing them all, hey, Barry.
Ever since this lockdown thing came on, and I was told I had to do this at home on my own, I've hardly slept at night. But it actually has all come together quite easily. Just hope there's no disasters. If all of a sudden I go off screen, I've touched the wrong thing, and I apologise in advance. I think we might be all right. Fingers crossed.
You're doing great, boys. You're doing great. So just to remind any of the new viewers that are joining us and maybe weren't with us in 2020, we launched back to cover a virtual TT experience really back in June. And Roy, you were with us from the beginning, sharing some of your mountain memories. And then Barry, we brought you on at a later date with you boys running your page on Facebook, and obviously with your history and involved so much in the history of the TT and the Manx Grand Prix and the Classic. Now, we've got you guys on every couple of weeks, every 2 weeks to enjoy those memories, and there's like fountain of knowledge that you have to offer us, and we tend to choose a theme, don't we, for the show? So we'll touch on the theme this evening, but before I do that, I do want to share just some more of the comments, because we've had loads of comments coming in, so it's great. I think everybody's missed you, boys. So Sue Russell says, hi. John Kosierski says, oh, lordy. Roger Bond says, evening all and a happy new year. Happy new year, Roger. Steve Hallam says, I've been to the TT for the past 49 years and his voice is the TT to me. Absolutely, Stephen. Judith Foster is inviting Sue. Hello, Sue. Come and join the party. And Terence Cartwright says, good evening. He's isolating in Liverpool. And Samantha Lloyd said, hi, good evening to you both. And Bill Davies says, hi, guys, lovely to see you. All right, boys. So shall we move on to the theme? So following your pictures that you've been sharing, there's some incredible pictures that your followers on the page, on Mountain Memories page, do share. And one that's popped up and been quite popular recently was posted by Patricia Kelly. And by seeing that and those pictures, it really moved me with a story that she attached to it as well. So that has been the reason for choosing this evening's title of the show, and it's Impressionable Debuts to the Alaman TT and the Manx Grand Prix. So, boys, who would like to get that ball rolling? Patricia Kelly's post about Mike Kelly.
I'll let Roy start it because it's Roy's era, and then I'll chip in what I know.
Well,
Like
it's one of
the Manx. Go on.
It's one of those things whereby when we all knew Mike Kelly, if you're of a certain age, because he came along as a virtual newcomer, a Manx newcomer to the Manx Grand Prix, rode for Reg Dearden, but he started out on a BSA. But my first memory, to be fair, of Mike Kelly was connected with the TT in a roundabout way. When he started his working life, he worked for the Highway Board, and they had an office in Athol Street. And I can remember going down to either get a driving license, or it wouldn't be to register my first car or bike. It would have been just to go into, more than often or not, get a driving license, because that was about the age I was. And he was behind the counter. But there is a connection with that. In the early days, when the boys came to the TT, they had to put a registration on their bikes. And they had to go to the Highway Board office to do that. And that was long before Mike Kelly started there. And they would go in and they would get a number, and that gave them the right then to ride their bike to the start finish. It doesn't apply now, but this is going back probably into the 30s, I would think, maybe even before that. So there were some registrations which came out, which are kept on record. And I know for a fact that there's one circulating in the Peel area of David Wright, and that's the registration that Howard Davies, I think, won on. And I should have checked it out really to be done. So Mike Kelly, my first recollection was down there at the Highway Board office and that connection with the TT. But another thing that occurred, when they had the Clubman's TT, which I think was the first one that he rode in, the majority were BSA Gold Stars. And the boys used to take the speedometer off and just leave the rev counter on. And it was difficult for us to relate to that. We weren't familiar with revs per minute. All we wanted to know was miles per hour. And I can remember walking through the paddock and looking at these BSAs and saying, what speed were you doing tonight? Yes. And he said, oh, about 115. And then I would look at the clock or the dial that was there, and there was nothing else but only 6, 7, 8, maybe, if you were really lucky. But they were rev counters. And I can remember somebody explaining to me the difference between a speedometer and a rev counter. But you'd be very familiar with rev counters, Barry. You've probably gone into the red line a few times on a rev counter.
Well, it's funny you saying that, Roy, about the rev counters. I was the same when I was younger. I remember looking at the race bikes as well to see what the speed went up to, and I couldn't make head and the tail of it. And it was many years later somebody explained that it was the engine speed, and it went up. It didn't really matter what speed you were doing. You didn't need to know that. And that's how in later years the boys on the production bikes used to put a bit of duct tape over the speedometer, because in lots of cases they didn't particularly want to know how fast you were going. But yes, I do remember that era very well. Mike Kelly, I think, actually, I've got off, Mike Kelly, probably his last Manx, I think, probably just after I was born, unfortunately. But I know all what he did. He was a regular top 10 man in the Manx. Certainly my mum knew him. I can remember her talking to him at the back of the grandstand, because Mike, after his racing career, went on to be, he done the Crossley tour, didn't he, taking the newcomers round?
Yeah, he was heavily involved in the organisation, wasn't he?
He used to do that, yes. And then I think after that, even he was driving the roads open car. So I don't remember him as a racer in his black leathers carrying his helmet. I can remember him more as an official in the green and yellow Manx Grand Prix coat walking around, you know. But I can remember when I was a young fella, I worked down the dairy doing the milk round with famous local character Skipper Roney, ex-stock car racer. And one of the milk members, a fella called Ewan Kelly from Crosby, and he said to me at the time, oh, Ewan's brother used to race in the Grand Prix. He was very good. So I'd assume that's Mike's brother then. Do you know him?
I don't know him at all, no. There was
He's either
another...
a brother or a cousin, but he looks very, very much like Mike Kelly.
Yeah, there was another Kelly from Port Erin, wasn't there? And he did Clubman's, Ray Kelly. And there was a story behind that as well, didn't they? The local police, he was a bit of a hooligan on the road, and they said, you want to get your talent and put it into proper racing. And he had a Triumph Twin, I think, and the Clubman's was held over the Clips course on just one particular occasion.
That's right.
I think he finished third.
It could have been third, yeah. D.R. Kelly. Well, he was on the taxis down the airport for a long time as well. And I always seen this fella down there yapping to everybody. And I didn't know who he was, although I'd heard of Raymond Kelly. And then in 2005, it was an anniversary of the Southern 100. Must have been 50 years, I think it would have been. And they had a bit of a do out the Golf Links Hotel for past winners. And this taxi driver fellow was in there, and I thought, who's he with? And one of the boys from the Southern Committee said, well, he was good in his younger days, him, Raymond Kelly. And I'd seen him for years and didn't even know it was him.
Yeah. Well, around that time that sorry, Hailey, you had a thing. I was just going to say,
for it, Roy. Yeah.
Around that time when Mike was probably a late arrival to those who would be established, and with it being that kind of early 50s, you know, I'm talking, I would be 8, 9, maybe 10 years of age if you were really struggling. But there was some local heroes. We'd had the Derek Ennett, George Costain wins in 54, and that gave rise to why I'm putting the Balown shirt on, because it was the launch of the Southern 100 through their success. But there was an awful lot of good fellas around there at the time. And that photograph at the back of the grandstand of the Manxies with Dennis Christian and George Costain, Derek Ennett, Colin Broughton, Bob Doughty, Alan Holmes. There was just like Randall Cowell was involved. They were all coming through. And they all got backing from a chap called Reg Dearden. And he had about 17 or 18 Manx Nortons. And he brought every one to the Isle of Man to be ridden by somebody. And they stayed, or one of the garages that I can remember sticking my head round was up at Castle Hill, up where Bob Doughty Jr. is living now. Big garage up there. Doughty's were a big photographic company on the island. They did developing and printing of the films, the old films you had to use. People wouldn't know what a film was now with the mobile phones and pressing buttons, but they were a big company, and they had a big garage there right as you went into the main driveway. And that was where I think there was a story behind it that Mike wasn't down on the list, and one of the boys fell off, I think, and he got the chance of riding one of the Dearden Nortons, and he took full advantage of it. But again, there's another cracking photograph of Mike going through Union Mills. And it's self-explanatory when you say, well, what was Union Mills like in the old days? And there's a big gable sticking out on the left-hand side, right opposite where the Bee Gees used to reside in the post office. And Mike is heading a couple of riders through there, and we show that occasionally. And I think he fell off at the waterworks at that time. But he's out in Australia now, and this is where the communication is coming. And Hailey's been on the agenda doing all that. And you've got a few other photographs as well, Hailey.
I do. Before we move on to those, though, we've got quite a few comments. We've got a question as well for you boys. So we've got John Kashirski's, here's my question for both Roy and Barry. Between two events, the TT and the Manx Grand Prix, is there a difference in the energy from the fans and the teams? Good question, John.
Well, it's not really so much of a thing as teams at the Manx Grand Prix compared to the TT. The TT is all about top teams and money and stuff like that, and lots of different merchandise allied to those teams. I was at the Manx Grand Prix. It's more jeans and t-shirt kind of a thing, John. The TT is a big money event. There's start money and there's prize money, whereas at the Manx there's no start money and there's no prize money. And although lots of people do come to both events, I think you get the archetypal TT fan, and similar to the Manx Grand Prix, I think they are two different types of people, to be honest with you, but they both have their great points. And I prefer the Manx. I would say, in your case, you need to come to the TT and do the real thing to start with. I don't know how you're going to cope with it when you do come, because you're hyper already with it.
I know. John is desperate.
I think you'll manage.
He's going to have quite a following here, I think. He's made some amazing connections. We've got some more comments, boys. Andy Karush says, evening, sorry I'm late. He's walking the dog. You can catch up, Andy, don't you worry about that. Peter Brown says, hello, Tang. And Martin Jules says, hello. Martin Harlan says, looking forward to listening to you whilst I'm cooking my dinner. What are you cooking? Paul Swift says T2 suits and boots, Manx t-shirt and jeans. Okay. Never done the TT, Sue Russell says, but Manx GP for me all the way. Good, great. All right. So we started with Only Rightfully So with Mike Kelly and those fantastic pictures and the post that Patricia posted on your Roy Moore and Barry Wood Mountain Memories group. We're just going to kind of move through a timeline. Go for it, Barry.
I was going to say what's interesting, if you look at any photographs of Mike Kelly, is from his early days, it was the unfaired machines. And as you come through the years to when he finished, they were very much faired machines. So he came through that whole sort of gamut of the different styles. Do you know what this last year was, Roy? Would you say about 64, 65, something like that?
Yeah, again, we're not people who do research really, because it looks a bit false when you get a piece of paper out and start kind of quoting it, and that kind of. It
was early mid-60s anyway. I'm just trying to
around about
before my time, but I would say I'd say about 64, 65 would be Mike Kelly's last time racing anyway.
Yeah. The other names that come to mind are the ones that you don't think about. There was a chap who lived in Pulley called Roy Kapner. And he got a license and he was riding, and he was a star man. I can remember all the things that Goo Owen told me about him, about spectating at Braddon Bridge and him there, and then he spotted Goo down at the front and started shouting that, I'm a TT rider, and what he was riding and this, that, the other. But he had
BSA, wasn't
it? A Roy Kapner BSA, and that's again the connection you make. You see, ARC Kapner.
Well, where did he live up at Hazel Crescent, was it?
Yeah, he was up in Pulley, in the old Pulley, like the Hazel and Heather was the new bit, and the bit down the bottom. True Pulley boy, born and bred. And there's another fella, a name that comes to mind. I know this isn't doing much for our foreign visitors from England when you mention the Manx names, but I can always remember a chap called Ken Taubman, and he rode. Yeah, and he worked in a grocer's shop, just down on the quay there, off the quay. When you swing off and come round, Hodson's the grocers, and you'd see him there with his big white overall on behind the counter, and then you'd see him up behind the grandstand. He wasn't a star man, but he was a competitor every year. And
but he's still around, Ken Taubman. He's in his 90s now. He still lives in Willerton Crescent.
Does he? Oh my goodness!
Yes, I see him driving up and down the road. And funnily enough, I was saying earlier about the milk round I used to do, which is all around the shops and the cappies at that time. And Ken Taubman's shop was one of the shops we used to deliver milk for him to sell in Quine's Corner.
Still Corner. Yeah, still about. Yeah, good one. And there's others.
Before we do move on, boys, we've just had one comment, and I was going to leave it to the end of the show, but it's been commented on now, so we have to highlight it. We appreciate the TT and the Manx Grand Prix, but Mr. 101 deserves a mention. Great result. Well, we've got to mention it now, haven't we, Nita? How proud are we of that Manxman and his commitment and what he delivered and what he achieved in those 2 weeks out there in the desert, hey? Yay!
Signed copy.
Yeah.
A great
That's,
achievement and great for the Isle of Man as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now he's isolated for 2 weeks, isn't he, when he gets home?
On his own, yeah, from that craziness to having to be on his own for 2 weeks.
The ups and
Okay,
downs.
you're always isolated when you live in Sulby.
Fair enough. All right, so we're moving on to the next shot then. I know we've paid a nod really and honoured this wonderful lady who's our next picture in when we did a show that was on the ladies of the TT, but because of her debut and the impact that she had, I had to honour it once again. So if we could bring the next picture in, please, wonderful Aid from the background. So was it 1964, boys, that she first rode Beryl Swain?
Yeah, Beryl Swain.
62.
Remember well. 62, I think it would be.
62,
Yeah, Barry,
wasn't it?
yeah.
1962.
There was quite an uproar, wasn't there? Now, we had a couple of ladies before in the sidecars, but she was the first solo rider to compete, wasn't she? And there was a few stern words getting expressed, and people who didn't agree with it.
It was only the one year she did, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. She had a license.
Only 62, and then politics came into it, and then it was many years after that before ladies were allowed again.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that little bike probably would only do about 60, 70 miles an hour, but it looks the business, it looks sporty. That's a little item, that, isn't it?
Item, yeah. Mike Hailwood started out on a 50cc item, so it's no disgrace that really, is he? And Bill Ivey.
Bill Ivey did as well. The Chisholm brothers item.
Yeah, it was a bit of a controversial thing, though. Really, I mean, the kind of even the controversy with Inga Stahl was just doing the passenger and for Jack Dreon on the clips. And that was 55, 56. We're miles out with years, but you get the gift of it, and that's when it is. But yeah, Beryl, I can tell you exactly where I watched Beryl Swain for the first time. I hadn't a clue what 50cc racing was going to be about. I didn't have a clue that they would be kind of, the difference between the works bikes and the ordinary ones, the items. But I was on the approach to Braddon Bridge, and you could hear them setting off down Bray Hill on their first ever practice. And you could hear them coming down, and you think somebody had swatted them on the way on Bray Hill. There was just like a buzz all the way down through. And then they head out towards Braddon. And the top men were through there early on. And then the rest came through later. And Beryl Swain, and I think on her first practice, she had a big woolly sweater on. For whatever reason.
I've seen photographs of that sweater, yes.
And she went past, and I thought, how is this going to survive, like, with the way? But then later on, Ralph Bryans, I think, averaged about 80 mile an hour on a 50cc machine, which is terrific. And it's a record that will never be beaten.
That photograph there is a posed one, obviously, isn't it? She said, "Get ready with your camera, and I'll ride up the road on the bike and take a picture of it." That's what's happening there. But
it looks great, though, doesn't it? There's so many great pictures. Is it a great shot of her posing again? Obviously, it was set up in a kitchen with parts from the bike, which she's working on parts from the bike sat in a kitchen. It's interesting.
Seen that, yeah. Oh no, good times.
But, yeah, a license was revoked, and then the next lady to race, I believe, was 1978 on the mountain course, which is quite a few. It's terrible, that, isn't it? What is that? 8 years? 19? Yeah.
No, it's more than that, I think, was it?
Is it?
60,
over 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's what an amazing lady. She had a great smile. She looked like she had a really good character too. But yeah, great debut, an impressionable debut, if there was one. So moving on, boys, to 1976. So we had quite an infamous impact beginning on the Isle of Man TT with the wonderful Joey Dunlop. So 1976, here he is. Now
today, sorry.
Go for it, Roy.
No, just I was just saying, the weather we've had in the Isle of Man today, And I've been sorting everything out. I've taken about 2 or 3 weeks to get through all the stuff. I'm not as organised as Barry with his files here, there, and everywhere. And we got the old DVDs out. And today, for the first time for about 6 or 7 years, I would think, I watched the real road races, and that is just a revelation to see. When you were saying that previous question, what do you enjoy, the Manx Grand Prix or the TT? To be fair, in the early, there's a big difference now. The motorhomes arrived for the TT, and everything is kind of world superbike, British superbike kind of presentation, even from when they're starting off on Glencrutchery Road, going through the arch, etc. But we watch the real road races. Joey constantly with a fag in his mouth, on the dole, digging peat to survive in the winter,
Yeah.
testing the bike, like keeping nicks, the boys keeping nicks and going up the road. Tractor just going out ahead of them, spraying shit all over the place, and then them coming back down through it. Him and Donny Robinson, his brother-in-law, doing about 110 mile an hour, testing the bikes before going off to a meeting. And big Frank Kennedy, sadly, he lost his life as well. But Frank Kennedy there getting strapped up to go, well worth a thing. Nothing to do with the TT until the very end, because it shows you Joey loading his bikes on a fishing boat to come to, I think, would be his second TT, and that would be 77 when he did the Jubilee race.
Yeah.
And then the amount of money that he got, Barry, for being a TT winner. Couldn't believe it.
Oh, life changing. But the first time Joey ever done the TT, and we got the program, and it was Joe Dunlop, number 65 or something like that. And I'd heard the name because he was dicing with my hero Ray McCulloch in the Irish road races. And we were sitting up at Bedstead, and this fella come down the road, green and black leathers, long black hair, very, very fast. But he looked too fast, I can remember my mum saying, I don't think he'll even see race week the way he's going. And well, this is how fast he was, But I mean, he obviously proved to everybody he was fast and he was safe. And then come back with the 700, cleaned up. And then next year at the TT, well, history was made that quickly. But the great thing for me was always, I remember Joey saying on that film, Roy, that he pretty much learned his craft of road racing by following Ray McCulloch.
Your hero.
Getting closer to him and closer to him, and eventually he was able to beat him. And I thought, well, what better TT could you have? Luckily, I am around long enough to have seen Ray and Joey and Trevor Steele and all these guys at the 100 dice and the Dramara Destroyers and the Armada, great times. But Joey was always just the same person, wasn't he? I mean, even at the Irish road races, he was just normal. He used to rile me sometimes if you'd be an hour in a scrutineering queue, and then Joey would arrive dead late, and he would start to meet queue for Joey. I said, well, hang on, I've been here over an hour. Joey. That was that.
Yeah.
But,
did you ever ride, Barry, at Cookstown? Because there's a sequence there of, I think Joey wasn't in the contention on that, but God, what a place. Talk about health and safety.
The old
oh, dear me.
It's 6 years, and I really enjoyed that. And that compared to the modern Cookstown now is a different thing altogether. That was 6.5 miles long, that course.
Yeah,
and,
the boys in the pub having a pint, and transit vans parked outside, and the lap record. Joey gets off and said, "Oh, he set a new lap record of 101 or something like that, going down the main street. It was like riding through Strand Street at 100 mile an hour."
Well, the one that was on at the end, the Mervyn one, the Carador 100.
That's
and
right.
They had all the crowds both sides of the road, and as he got more and more drunk, because it was a pub at the side of the road, and as the day went on, the barriers got closer and closer in towards the riders, and they were getting more and more drunk. And I think in the end, he had to move the start away to a different place on the course, completely away from the pubs. But that was after having seen that film. That's why I said I had to go there. And I done the Carador just for once, right after the Manx. When you've seen films like that, to go to those places gave me a great buzz. And it's not just the racing; it's the characters as well. It's the social crack, good times.
Good
It's a
times.
different vibe, that road racing family, isn't it? It's a beautiful
And
thing.
next, Hailey, and the next one, Hailey.
So
What have we got next, Hailey?
we have to nod that Joey still he's still well and truly owns that 26 TT wins, isn't he? You know, he's still referred to as the king of the mountain.
And it looks safer than ever the way things are now, to be honest, doesn't it?
Does really, yeah. Although I did see a bit of announcement. It took me by surprise. We're trolling through as you do, and when you're in lockdown, and something about John McGuinness talks about retirement, which would be the nearest contender to Joey's record. Like we all know the kind of ins and outs of whether electric bikes qualify, but then again, in the old days there was more classes. So you know 600,000 same bike, but there was a thing there about Norton Return, which took me by surprise. But it's a new company that have been involved or got through all the kind of the stories about Norton of the past, and there's a possibility that that might be another return. Have we been talking on Mountain Memories about Irish road racing? We get back to the mountain, I think now. Back to the grandstand, Kaylee.
So we've got John Kosterski saying, on my reviews, I love watching the pits from the T2 with the $1 million transporters and the Manx Grand Prix folk with the mum and the dad trucks and vans. It's just amazing. Peter Brown says, evening, Wally. Damien Horan says, loving Barry and Roy's story. Can't wait to get back to normal and back on the road to race weekends. I totally agree, Damien. I'm with you. Alec McFetrich says, haven't been for a while, but used to stay with a lovely family, Ned and Sylvia Moran, down at Port Grenyek. I'm sure they are not listening, but if they would, I would love to say hello and thanks for your hospitality in the past. Miles Caller also says, the film that Roy refers to can't be recommended enough. The Road Races, directed by David Wallace. It's excellent. Brilliant. Fantastic. All right. So next picture then. So we're going to move on, boys, to 1985. Now we've done a few nods to the two wheels. Now we've got to move to the three wheels, haven't we? We've got to acknowledge the beginning of Molly's career. Now Molly is he's up there, isn't he, with the greats? If he's not one of the Manx TT greats on three wheels, and he's still going now, 30 plus years, right? And he's still racing, and he's still at the top of his game.
I don't know how on earth Molly has the continuing enthusiasm and the energy to do what he does, and nobody would bet against him every year. Who was his passenger here? Was this
Paul Crane, I believe.
Paul Crane, yeah. Well, he gets a good mention in Molly's book, doesn't he? He was the pub rocker. He was Molly's early passenger. Sid Crane, you call him Sid. I remember him being up at Derby racing, but I don't know him. This Molly's very early days. There's not a sponsor on there hardly in them days. And he went from that into the remember Irving's the hygiene place, wasn't it? All like blue, white, and red.
Yeah. Frank Irving, wasn't it?
Yeah, they were up behind B&Q up there. He's just got a little street on there too, Molly.
Do you know where it all started for Dave Molyneux? I'm just trying to think of who it was. It might have been George Odell, I think it was. And they were testing out the Ballamorda Straight, which again is like the real road races. Our version of testing area was the Pennypot Road. Going back even further than that, they used to run bikes up and down the mountain mile. But if you wanted to sneak a bit of testing in, again, the police at the time were all well known to everybody. They knew it was going on, but they turned a blind eye. And there's a terrific photograph. I think it was George Odell was testing his outfit, and Dave Molyneux would probably be only about 10, 11 years of age. And he got a photograph taken, which again was an unusual thing in the old days, of him sitting in the sidecar. And he didn't get taken up and down the Ballamorda, but obviously with his dad being a sidecar competitor as well, well, then certainly it was the seed was getting sown for another generation to take up the gauntlet. And
Somebody
out
had
to
a garage out
Ballamorda.
that way. Somebody
Yeah,
had a
they did.
garage out there. Was that one of the Oatses?
I think it was, yeah.
In at
George.
Wigan Lane, that's a little lane that runs down parallel in behind the Ballamorda. So they'd go up there on a Sunday, work at the outfit, and then when there was any testing to be done, they'd just go out onto the Ballamorda, blast up and down there at high speed. And I think they must have had some stuff there where to work at the outfit, and George Odell came out, and that's where that picture of Molly with used to be a future world champion.
Yeah.
We're a lot
Jeff
quieter
Cannon.
on the Ballamorda in them days than it is now, of course. And the speed limits on the Ballamorda too these days. Which,
50 mile an hour.
It goes from 50 down to 40 just for the Elf stool, but I always stick to them in the taxi, like, but
You know, the story, again, another sad occurrence that has happened is that Jeff Cannell left us in 2007, but on Monday morning, his wife Linda died. And the story of Dave Molyneux's first ever win, again, don't ask me for years or anything like that. But what had happened was that there was a close race between him and Kenny Howells, and Kenny Howells pulled into the enclosure area at the grandstand, and Jeff Cannell had started not long doing the interviews after the races, and he got a nod through his earphones that there'd been a starting error, and that although Kenny Howells was circulating on the course and in theory had won, the starting error relegated him to second, and Dave Molyneux actually won that. Now, what year that would be? 89, maybe?
87 was his first win.
87. Well, his first ever win. And Jeff was getting fed the information through the earphones by Peter Neal up in the grandstand and said, "We've got a bit of good news for Dave Molyneux, but bad news for Kenny Howells." And it was Jeff Cannell with the microphone in hand who went up and said, "Sorry, boys, there's been, although we're claiming the win for Kenny Howells, there's been a starting error, and it is in fact Dave Molyneux who has won this particular race." And Kenny Howells, to his eternal credit, just said, "Well, if that's the way it is." There was no drama about it. And then all the attention went then to Dave, and who was in the chair with him at the time? The chap who was the scrutineer.
Colin Hardman.
Yeah, Colin Hardman. Yeah, Colin Hardman. So that gave them their first win, and it was much reported at the time, but one of those mountain memories that you do it. And he had to do the same to Mick Lofthouse and Mark Baldwin.
He did, and what a horrible job to have to do. Somebody's got to do it, but I wouldn't change places. Because the emotions are running sky high at those times, aren't they, after a race?
They are that, yeah.
Yeah, a swift right hook. Some of them probably, I think. All right, so Dave Molyneux, he was the most successful sidecar competitor in the history of the Isle of Man TT. And he's he sat in the top 4 with regards to winners in our very and much loved event. So we got some more comments here, boys. So Gail Core, loving the Irish road race banter. I think the Cookstown track Roy is talking about would have been the old Sherry Groom circuit. I'm too young to remember it.
Absolute nonsense. Yeah, she was there for decades. Gail Core watching that race. I've seen that.
We've also got Brian Moore, Roy, commenting here. All right, from Silver Soil, Uncle Luke and Barry. Looking great as always, Hailey. Thank you, Brian. Question: do you believe that TT and the Manx will ever happen again?
Absolutely it will. Absolutely it will, because if you didn't have events like that, people will go back to racing their bikes on a Sunday afternoon out on the country roads. You'd say, well, I'll meet you up on the Cretton back road, the 3 of us, and we'll time each other going round. This is how things started. It's much better to have a proper race meeting under constraints and rules and regulations. There will always be people who want to race on the roads and go faster than the other person, and there will always be people who will want to race on the TT course. Too much history and heritage there for people not to want to do that. Anybody whose older brother or their mother, their father or their grandfather raced on the course will want to do that. Things probably won't be as easy, after a break with insurances and stuff like that. But there'll be no shortage of people lining up to take part in it. That's a fact.
Agreed.
The only observation I would have on that, and we have been not slated, but we've had a kind of oh, you shouldn't be saying that, but we're going to have 2 years of nothing, which is going to be more or less certain now, really, isn't it? We've had 700 new residents on the island, something like that, maybe 350 bought houses and have the postal address of one Laurel Bank or something like that. And they haven't had anything this year, obviously, and they won't have anything till next year. There might be a little bit of unrest there when all of a sudden, oh, you didn't tell me when I bought the house that we're going to be locked down. And the other thing is that you can't make arrangements if you're Manx for possibly 6 weeks of the year. 2 weeks in race week, and then a week for people to come and a week for people to go. And there's no absolute opportunity for corporate happenings. They just avoid 6 weeks of the year. But they will be organising events for this year if things turn out more normal in later on in it, and then that they might get used to that. And I got kind of pulled up for that. Oh, you shouldn't be putting ideas in the head, but it's not an idea of mine. It's just a fact of life. That there might be a little bit of, it's a tricky one, Moot, and thanks very much for putting us on the spot.
We've got a few comments about that. Long live the Manx Grand Prix. We had a couple of comments there, Barry saying 100% Barry. Well said, Barry, as well. It's a tough one to have to accept that it's not going to happen for a couple of years, but it definitely will happen again. Hey, boys, it's got to. So moving on to 1996, as we recognise impressionable debuts, or really what they achieved post their debut as well, is the great Mr. McGuinness, John McGuinness, and then also David Jeffries. Now, I found a couple of pictures of them with Joey Dunlop, so I had to be shown. So look how young John is there. So John, obviously on the right, with that cheeky glint in Joey's eye and a little wink. So yeah, the debut in 1996, Roy, and then we've seen so much from John, haven't we, over the years? He's achieved an incredible amount.
Yeah, this is the era where things changed for me, really. I was kind of working and to be fair, this is why the combination works between Barry and myself, because I can go back to Mike Kelly and genuinely say I've watched him race, and then work up through all the 60s with the Hailwood era, and then the 70s when I started work. And it's hard to believe, but you couldn't get time off for the races. It was just impossible. And again, believe it or not, when I was working, you weren't allowed to listen to a radio. How on earth the people that were involved at that time that I worked for would cope with people doing their social life on mobile phones? But I couldn't bring a radio into work to listen to the broadcast. So it was a kind of a blank area. But you can well remember the arrival of these fellas here. Like, I mean, Joey, 76, I think he came over, and then 77, the win. And he was one that you were always looking out for. And there was others around that time too, Roger Marshall and Roger Burnett. And yeah, you'd step back and think about them all. But yeah, certainly it was a time. I don't think John McGuinness made such as big an impact, really, to be fair. You knew he was going to be good.
John was on the 250, really, wasn't he?
Yeah,
John came on the 250 because I can remember listening to the wireless for the Northwest 200 a couple of weeks before the TT, and a certain John McGuinness from Morecambe was like 7th or 8th in the 250 races, and I thought, well, who was he? And then he come to the TT, so I knew he'd go well by what he'd done on his first attempt at the Northwest. And he did do well. And then I seen him up at Scarborough in the early days as well, and he was flying. So Then, of course, he got onto the big bikes, and it was history. But he still was like his 250 job, of course.
Yeah, well, he started off on a Kawasaki, didn't he? Took the lights off it and everything like that.
In the early, yeah.
KR1, was it?
Yeah.
Or whatever they may be. But when you think of all the people who made a big impact, you know, you've mentioned David Jeffries and the Peter Hickmans with their arrival and stuff like that. And it's still happening, isn't it? There's names that come through. But yeah, it's Josh Brooks. Josh
always
Brooks
has
came.
been, always will be.
Yeah, there's always people that you look out for, and again, it's amazing, really. And we haven't mentioned, well, we haven't officially mentioned 90, but when you look at the footage of the Dakar, and you look at the boys, every single motorcycle entrant in that looked quick. They were going over dunes. Some were getting buried in them and having to dig themselves out and all that. And you think, oh, Niter will be all right. He's just going there. And then he's telling you at the end of the day, I was taking it easy. I was rolling off the throttle. And then somebody worked out that for the days that he was in the desert, not knowing what was in front of him, he averaged something like 50 miles an hour for all the stages. And you're thinking, when you see riders come to the TT, you say, God, he looks quick. And then you're looking at their times and they're not. And then you'll get the others like Joey, like Hailwood, like the really, the top men, and they're kind of unobtrusive, and they're setting the times and they're learning their craft. Peter Hickman, probably, and Guy Martin of modern day, that they all do their homework and they get it done. But you get somebody that say, God, he looks quick, and then the times don't do justice to it.
It was so bloody exciting when Hickman hit the streets of the TT, wasn't it? Hit the roads of the TT course. It was bonkers. The atmosphere around that was insane.
Well, it was only quite recently. I let it be known on the group that Peter Hickman's father actually had won the Manx 40 years ago. Lots of people didn't know about that.
I didn't know that either. Wow.
No, and I don't think that Dave Hickman was too, Peter in the TT course. There was a bit of history, a reason why, But he did it indeed, and he improved dramatically, and now he's one of the main two or three men there.
We've got more comments here, boys. We've got Dave Cook is saying smooth is fast. Yeah, it's very true. Donald Hughes says, are Norman Brown and Phil Reed still the only riders to win on their debut TT? Great question, Donald.
Well,
I don't think Phil Reed was a winner, because he rode in the newcomers Manx Grand Prix about 58. They did a class, and I think he finished third in that. So Norman Brown would probably go, but Barry's era. So from Ramsey Hairpin, we hand you back to Williston Crescent.
Well, I'll tell you something now, going back a long time. And Roy will remember, if you went over on the Queen's Prom, Shimmer's Garage.
Yeah.
Remember Shimmer's Garage? Hailey,
I know the one.
Probably won't quite remember that.
No.
Over by the Conti, remember the Conti in the Queen's Pub? Over that end, there was a little garage called filling station. And for many years, it had two numbers up on the front wall, 14 and 49. And people used to say, well, why are they there? And the reason they were there was the Twemlow brothers, two brothers who garaged there, and they both won the TT in 1924, and they were both newcomers.
Newcomers, yeah.
Right, so that answers your question, Bob. To start with, right? Now I think he did race. There was one previous Manx Grand Prix, or whatever you call it, the Manx Amateur Road Race. I think he raced the previous year. And this is what you say with a TT newcomer winner. Are they a newcomer to the course, or are they a newcomer to the meeting? There's lots of won the TT, but on the Manx of several years before. 1971-25, when the first three men were all foreign newcomers. Peter Braun, Boris Janssen, and Gunther Barbish, who were all here for World Championship points at that time. And that's absolutely a one-off, where the first three men were all Europeans, and they were all completely newcomers of the course. They never did the Manx. They came here for World Championship point. And that will never happen again. That's a great quiz question, that one, Roy.
It's a great quiz question, Barry. They just roll out, don't they? I'm like, how do you store all this knowledge? Andy Karush says, my friend Peter Jones worked out NITA did about average 52 miles per hour for the 2,456 miles of special stages at Dakar. That's insane. I agree. And then we have Sue Russell saying Tony rode with Dave Hickman and every man and his dog. Brilliant. So we just have one final one, I believe, boys.
Tony being Tony Russell, who's still racing here at Boulogne and in what they refer to as a classic TT, and has raced every year, I think, since 1969. Still going for that season and a half, just to explain that. Right? Sorry, Hailey, putting in there.
Great, love it. So we have, now we've got a couple more. We've got 2006, as we acknowledge the great William Dunlop, and of course our very own Manxman Conor Cummins made his debut in the same year as well. William made quite an impact. Hey Roy on the TT and the Manx, and obviously so much more.
William and Michael, really.
William and Michael, yeah.
Michael probably beforehand, and it was a bit. Yeah, if you read back on his kind of contribution in those early days, you won't find too many people who were saying good things about him. Really, it's a fact of life. It's not me. This is not me saying it, but he frightened the life out of a lot of people. Sideways, backing it in, just kind of unleashed. And
William or Michael, Roy, you're referring to?
Michael, I'm thinking
Michael,
of, really, basically, because William was entirely different in approach and stuff like that. And again, in lockdown, it's a perfect opportunity. They both, Michael has written a book with help, obviously, from that, and I've read it. But when you go back over it, that is again another book which you should read about Michael Dunlop and the relationship he had with William in the early days. They had another brother who was just not interested in bikes, and he's very, very frank and candid about his dad as well. Being involved and the problems that he had and how he openly admits he might have been a bit of a wild boy in his time, but he was tamed, and God, you wouldn't bet against him coming back again and being up there amongst it with the Dean Harrisons and the Hickmans and whoever else is going to appear as a possible first time Manx. James Hine came to the Manx Grand Prix. Jim, I think he calls himself now, but he would have been a contender for possible fastest newcomer as well. 120 in the Manx Grand Prix, and then moving up in capacity class, and it's a never-ending story.
I think, Roy, when you used to ask the question about who were the riders who won the TT before and after World War II, now it's going to be who's going to be the first rider to win a TT before and after lockdown situation. It's a 3-year gap, isn't it? Really. But by then you may there's not much of the racing going on, but you will have younger riders wanting to try to topple the established ones.
Want to be involved.
So we come back to the year that William debuted. He also debuted with Conor as well. So Conor, he's made his impact as well on as a Manx lad and a local lad. He's had quite a few challenges over the years with that huge off that he had and the recovery mission that he had on his hands to get back to racing. And boy, did he was a comeback kid, wasn't he, Barry?
Yeah, I remember when Conor was coming to do the TT the first time, and I have a photograph of myself and Conor setting out together, which was quite exciting, Conor passed me at the Quarry Bends, and he cleared off, and then by the end of the week, he just learned, and then he just went into all basically, massive crash, like you say, And, you know, if you would have seen Connor in the months following the accident, you wouldn't even have recognised him. He was down at the line helping his dad when he was able to the following year. And he lost so much weight, but he's come back. The Manx people have always wanted Connor to win a TT, and we still do want that to happen. But hopefully it will do.
Could have won it. Could have won it, Barry, couldn't he? He had the lead. They went out of the pits and had trouble getting into gear, and then the news came through. He was, I think, at the Manx radio had announced Chris Kinley were there. That's a rare sight.
That rings a bell, yeah.
And the gearbox went at Laurel Bank, and he still had an advantage and still in the lead. That was on the McAdoo Kawasaki, I think. Yeah.
But you know that the Cummins are very much a Ramsey family as well, and it's great to see that Cummins built his business up in Ramsey. I remember years ago wanting to buy a galvanised mop bucket, and you couldn't get one on the Isle of Man anywhere. And I went up to that Felton. Somebody said, go to Felton's in Ramsey. And the old fella come out with the bus coat on and shirt and tie, and he said, he said, we got one upstairs. Go up and ask the young fella. And it was this young fella over in the corner with a dust coat on, scratching rain. And I said, you got any galvanised mop buckets? And he goes, hey boy, it was Connor working. Daddy job to earn more money to carry on racing. So, yeah. No, brilliant. Nice pick.
So moving on, boys, we got a couple more comments here. So 2007 was when Michael Dunlop made his debut, but Andy Carucia's just mentioned here on the evening of Michael's first win in the Supersport 600, he was sat in the Queen's on Douglas Promenade on the Isle of Man, talking to Michael, shy and very much staying out of the limelight, and nothing like the hot-headed rider he's made out to be. A real polite lad.
I never met him. Never met Michael, to be honest with you. But I'd never actually met any of the Dunlops. I picked up Robert and William at the airport one time in the taxi when he was tests at the Mount Murray for the Joey Dunlop dinner. And I tried to get a conversation going, but they were very, very quiet. Tried, but yeah. Joey, I never knew Joey. I never, just was never in a place to speak to him, you know. But you know what? There was one time at Dundrod, Joey had broken down over the quarries, and then we were a bit further down from that. And the news went right, Joey's walking back. And there was a hole in the hedge about 6 feet wide across the road from us. And everyone's waiting. You couldn't see Joey approach. For about 2 seconds, you see Joey walking past. About 1,000 cameras all flash at the same time. And I've got a picture there somewhere. Everyone has a Joey story.
Great. Yeah. So, boys, we're going to finish with a 2009 picture, and we have to acknowledge the fantastic Jenny Tinmouth. So she made her debut in 2009, and she became the fastest woman around the TT course, breaking the world record and clocking in 116.483 mile per hour on her final lap, beating Maria Costello's in 2004. By 17.72 seconds. She's now a stunt woman, and she still very much competes as well, doesn't she? What an amazing, incredible debut and impact she's made on the TT from a female perspective as well. Hey, Roy.
Bit of detective work there. I would suggest that's at a Joey Dunlop dinner, because Maria Costello and Jenny Tinmouth were invited to a Joey Dunlop dinner down at the Empress Hotel, and with the name Cummins on the bike, that possibly would have been the one they would be putting up for auction. I don't think so. It probably would have been another one that was put on stage. But if you could imagine the task that was on that night, interviewing 2 ladies, one who had taken the kind of record away from the other, and the other one wasn't too happy about it, because Maria Costello OBE was the outright lap record holder, about 114 mile an hour or something like that. And then Jenny came along, the most unassuming person, so shy to talk to and everything, but aggressive on the bike. And we had a personal interest because she was getting sponsorship from Manx Glass and Glazing, whom I worked for, Greg Turner. And through the post the other day came a Jenny Tinmouth calendar off a short circuit prowess, and that BSB. But that night will go down in history because it was like Barry's cats. Really, they were held them up, and then they were having a bit of a fight over the "I'm better than you." Well, I've got the record, so up yours. It was 119, a fraction short of 120.
119.98, wasn't it? It was
Yeah.
just blink of an eye.
And we don't know, but that could be a record that stands for a long, long time as well.
Yeah. Incredible.
It could well be. And this is with the transponders. Years ago, that could have been 120 plus such and such, because, you know, the old way, which is by trying to line up by eye. Do you understand what I'm saying about that?
Yeah, fair comment.
Like the Jeff Duke 99.97 lap, for example.
Aye, yeah. Jeff Cannell got the official piece of paper. He had two official pieces of paper in his collection. One where they said it's 100 mile an hour lap, and the other one where they'd amended it, crossed it out, and put 99.9.
Really?
Yeah. That's in somebody's hands now, here, there, and everywhere.
Well, with transponders, there's no arguing with the things, but
VAR, it's the VAR of road racing, isn't it?
I don't even know what that means.
Video assistant referee.
Oh, they have it in football, don't they?
You could have video assisted timekeeper. VAT
69.
Yeah.
So, boys, just a question for you before we do have to sign off. It's a good one, actually, about the scoreboard. So David Cowley says, any news on what the new scoreboards are going to be like at the grandstand? I have great memories of being on the Scouts holding the flag next to Phil Reed. A sad loss with the scoreboards going. I totally agree, David. Any news, boys? You have any update?
Well, since the other ones came down and we sort of got used to them not being there, nothing's really happened, Roy, has it?
The only thing I would say is that we were involved. I probably got the start to finish collection of photographs, which we've posted to the site. There wasn't much happening visually on some days, but towards the end, when I got permission to take a photograph of the boys who had done it so well, and that's where we got kind of involved in Manx Radio. I just went down and said full credit to them. All the boards were dismantled properly. That they weren't wrecked. They didn't send a digger in. There was 4 lads who, in all kinds of weather, didn't do a demolition job. They carefully dismantled them. And right at the end, when we were getting that photograph, there was another fella walking around with a hard hat on and a camera, and just got into conversation. And he said he'd been designated to investigate what would fit and what the new look would be. And the basis of it was it will be possibly electronic to kind of keep everybody happy. And the Boy Scouts will still be involved, but instead of being walking up and down the front, which is a bit vulnerable, it might be that their contribution be done from behind the scoreboards and from behind the concrete, which is going to remain on the frontage as a bit of a barrier. So that would be the latest, but I'm pretty certain that with the extra time that they've got now, before they won't be needed till 2022, that I think there will be a situation which will occur where everybody will be happy. Moving on. It's sad, but it's a fact of life. And you're talking about transponders and eyesight of timekeepers and how it's affected things in the past. And the new ones will be good, and they'll have to keep something in control with all the pit crews, because they won't be able to look up and see, oh, there's lights on at Cronknamona. We better get the fuel ready. It'll be all done in this modern age, something that baffles me. Technology.
Baffles me, Roy. So we got some message of thanks here, boys. We've got Trisha Millman says, we have so enjoyed this live show. Thank you. Love from South Africa. John Kashirski says, wonderful show, you all. Great to hear from the 3 of you. Judith Forrest says, thank you. And Andy Krush, thank you. Really enjoyed this. Needs to be done in a pub full of fans. Questions from the floor. An idea for future Manx Grand Prix. Great idea, Andy. I love that. I'd have a pint of bushies in my hand. Judith Foster, thanks, Roy. This is a good to hear. And yeah, brilliant. Great, boys. So it's been an absolute pleasure once again to see you back on here with us. Lucky for us, we're going to have you back on every 2 weeks, sharing your mountain memories. So viewers who have tuned in, thank you so much for supporting us. Remember, the boys are joining us every 2 weeks and sharing their stories and their memories of the mountain course and the TT and the Manx Grand Prix. If you have anything in particular you want to hear from them, any particular theme that you might want us to address, please let us know. Get involved and make sure you share this with your friends. And remember, the live show is very much about you getting involved just as much as we are too. So, boys, Barry, well done, you coming all on your own from your bedroom. I love it.
I've been buzzing all night. At least we know we can do it now.
And Roy, thanks. Nice new light, looking very smart. And thank you, boys. It's been brilliant seeing you. Very happy New Year to you. And I cannot wait to see you again in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Thanks for that compliment, Hailey. If I'd known I was going to live this long, I'd have taken better care of myself. Back to the grandstand.
Take care, boys. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We've got more great comments here every 2 weeks, Rob. That is correct. Paul Wells says, nice one. Thanks, all. Tracy said, thanks, Bazza and Roy. Joe Newton says, great show, guys. Brilliant. Pat Karouche, Andy's mum, late to the show. What a great show. Thank you both. No problem, Pat. You can watch it back from the beginning. It's going to be available to you on the YouTube channel forever, really. So, everyone, thank you. It's so good to be back live again with the boys. As I said, they're back in 2 weeks again. What do you think of my hoodie? So we've got our new branded merchandise. We've got our jumpers, the t-shirts, beanies, caps, etc. So you can head over to the tsom.shop website, check it out. And all the merchandise is on there. I love mine. I've literally been living in it since I got it. Yeah, have a little look. But listen, thank you for your support. We really appreciate everyone that also not only continued to support us over the last few weeks as we've supported NITA, but also that jumped on board to donate to David and also follow his journey. We've got so much more to come from David as well. It was an absolute honor that we joined him on his mission to go and dance in that Arabian desert and take on that challenge of the grueling Dakar Rally 2021. And boy, did he smash it. Now, he went there simply with the mission just to complete the race. And he did, finishing 24th overall out of 101 entries. Now, we just really jumped on to interview him, first of all, and try and push his GoFundMe campaign at the beginning. And before we know it, a couple of months later, here we are still with him and very much joining him on the next stage of his journey, whatever that might be. But I'm sure he will announce something very soon. So stay tuned, everyone. Thanks again for joining myself, Roy and Barry. We'll be back together again in 2 weeks. Myself, I will be back on here. We've got more shows coming in that time. And also, again, joining me will be Mr. David Knight, MBE. So that is soon to be announced. But for now, I'm going to leave you with the latest update from the man himself. I'm Hailey Coxon, and this is the Spirit of Motorsport TV.
Good. Are you? You have a good sleep. Good morning, Billy. Not too much to say in the early morning.
Protect my hands. They are all damaged. I will say to the people, if you want something, you can do it.
You've got to believe in it. You know, in anything, I tell my kids that if you want something, you can get it. You just got to work hard. You know? A lot of negative people around you. You've got to, if you've got a dream, go after it.
David Knight.
Great to reach the finish. It's a dream come true really. So very happy. Just thank everyone, all the team for keeping the bike going, and everyone that supported me to get me here. It's been an amazing journey.
This $69 monocular telescope is taking the world by storm. It allows you to see everything from miles away and take spectacular pictures